So thank you all for joining us. Good morning and welcome to the second annual Love Irish Food webinar. The theme of this year's webinar is embracing change, adapting to change, and never is that more true, I think, than the times that we're living in now. Love Irish Food is an association that is exclusively focused on the food and drink sector in Ireland. We have over 60 member companies representing over 100 member food and drink brands that are produced in Ireland with locally available ingredients. And the message from Love Irish Food is that now more than ever, it's important to support locally produced food and drink brands. I would like to thank Love Irish Food members, our retail partners, and those in the food industry for joining us today. And of course, to our speakers today. We have an excellent lineup of speakers who will take us through the next hour, and I hope will give us some insights into that ever-changing landscape that we're experiencing. We're starting off with Tara McCarthy, CEO of Bordbia, followed by James Wilson, the food director of Dunnes Stores. Some interesting insights from Cork University Business School from Professor Joe Bogue and Dr. Lana Rapar, and then finishing up with David Berry, Managing Director of Kantar Ireland. So I'd also like to thank our Love Irish Food Chairman, Donal Williamson, and Executive Director, Kieran Rumley, for organising today's event and for all of the work that they do to support Irish food and drink brands. So the food sector has faced waves of challenge over the last couple of years in the forms of Brexit, COVID-19, challenges to input costs, and of course, the serious geopolitical events that we're experiencing at the moment. Those challenges seem never ending, but grocery shoppers have responded and continue to buy an increased share of Irish food and drink brands. So today we should get an insight into that ever-changing landscape. Really looking forward to hearing our speakers today. And I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who will be known to many of you, Tara McCarthy, the CEO of Bordbia. Over to you, Tara.
Good morning, and many thanks to Donal, to Kieran, and yourself, Alison, for the invitation to speak to you all here today. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to join you, albeit virtually, as I'm sure you're aware that the mission of Love Irish Food in advancing the future of locally produced food and drink brands remains one that's really close to my heart. And the theme of today's seminar is embracing change, adapting to change. And if the past 2 years has taught us anything, and current circumstances continue to teach us more, it is how innovative and agile the Irish food, drink and horticulture sector have been in navigating the impact of COVID-19 while simultaneously managing issues like the transition to Brexit and global challenges such as climate change and sustainability, and now with that added current complexity of a war in Europe. Irish food and drink producers and manufacturers just deserve huge credit for the way in which they face the challenges of the last 2 years. And it's absolutely our privilege in Bordbia to support the risk takers, the visionaries and the innovators, those businesses and farms, they're large and small throughout the country. And I guess our role is to help them to navigate the challenges of the future while making Ireland the most sustainable place in the world to produce food and drink. So from our perspective in Bordbia, it's a great job to have. And in acknowledgement of the wider environmental and societal role Irish producers provide for the country, value creation and value capture is at the heart of Bordbia's new strategy that's titled Nurturing a Thriving Future. And we developed that in the context of the wider policy ambitions that have been set out by our industry's Food Vision 2030, and in recognition of the critical role Bordbia can play in nurturing the future of our farmers, our producers, our clients and stakeholders, businesses, supporting them on their farm to fork journey. The Irish market is a platform for the international success of the Irish food and drink industry. Being really purposeful and effective in the Irish market helps build brands that can actually compete internationally. And last year, the value of Ireland's food, drink and horticulture exports increased by 4% to a record €13.5 billion. And as reported in our own Performance and Prospects report, this is the equivalent of Ireland exporting around €37 million worth of food and drink every single day to consumers in more than 180 countries worldwide. And this increase is a testament to the strength and innovation of our sector in the face of all of the significant trading challenges. Notwithstanding that positivity, however, global economic uncertainty is made all the more acute with the current events in Ukraine and a myriad of other barriers to growth. They continue. And these barriers include labour shortages, inflation and availability across raw materials, most particularly energy, as well as supply chain disruption. And all of these are complex issues that are being faced at a global level, and they will require global and local solutions. And it's against this backdrop that issues such as Brexit are continuing to play out as well. According to our 2021 Readiness Radar survey, when it comes to preparedness for the impact of Brexit, over 80% of companies feel they're very well or somewhat well prepared. And that's a testament to the hard work of the industry, but there's also clarity in industry that there's more disruption to come. It's also not going to be news to you that the agenda around the topic of sustainability has accelerated over the last 5 years, and it will continue to do so. To understand sustainability in its broadest sense, we conducted one of the largest pieces of research that Borbia and the Origin Green team has ever commissioned. And what we heard was that 61% of consumers are looking to make more sustainable choices around food and drink, and an even higher proportion say reduced packaging and food waste will become more important to them. So a year of uncertainty has also deepened consumers' needs for reassurances and peace of mind when it comes to brand choice and product origins. At the end of last year, we undertook an omnibus study with Irish consumers, and on this occasion, we were looking at food service. But what was really reassuring to hear was that for consumers, sustainability and supporting local remained important considerations in choosing their food service options. And these trends are also being reflected in some of our recent global consumer insight studies. So it's clear that 2 years of uncertainty deepened consumer needs for reassurances and peace of mind when it comes to brand choice and product origins. So we know that local has taken on a new meaning during the pandemic. And this was reflected again in our 2021 Feeling the Pinch global research. Local continues to matter in people's decision making, and now it carries even more premium associations. People are looking to brands and to retailers to provide support in their efforts to weather the storm. There is, however, a watch out of the need to provide consumers with reassurance that local does indeed mean better value and better quality for them. People need to be continuously reminded that local equates to good value for money. So finally, at a time when we've never faced so much uncertainty, we here in Borbia believe that insights are more important than ever. I've only touched on a fraction of the information, of the observations and the recommendations that are within our recent global and local studies, and from our brand forum, which continues to be a rich source of best practice and connections to build better brands in the food industry. But I would like to wish the members of Love Irish Food well in the critical role that you play in driving growth and advocacy for the food and drink industry. And I want to reassure you that the team in Borbia remain at your disposal to drive the success of our industry. So please stay safe and stay well. And thank you once again for the opportunity to be with you this morning.
Thank you, Tara, and thank you for the work of Borbia. I think we're very lucky in this country to have an organisation like Borbia providing that level of support to Irish food and drink producers that really positions us well for our work both here and our export markets. So thank you very much for those words. I'd like to move on to our next speaker, James Wilson, who is the food director of Dunnes Stores. And as we know, Dunnes have invested, grown and adapted in that highly rapidly changing retail environment, food environment. I suppose those changes we've seen over the last number of years, retailers have been at the coalface dealing directly with consumers in those times of difficulties. And James is going to take us through both what has happened and his views on moving forward in terms of Dunnes' position in that market. So you're very welcome, James Wilson.
Okay, so I just wanted to just go and talk through how Dunnes Stores have coped with the pandemic and how we're setting ourselves coming out of it. I was almost going to rename my slides "What the hell just happened in the last 2 years?" because it's kind of been somewhat of a transformation for us in terms of how business has taken place and what we've seen over the last 2 years. And it obviously has exposed some weaknesses in our business model, and that's something that we probably will talk through in terms of what we have to look at the end of it. So in terms of what happened, you can see from the chart. The chart shows basically the blue line is our transactions through the till, and the brown line is the average size of the basket. And you can see very clearly what happened through each of the lockdowns. So initially we had a massive panic buying, and you can see the size of the baskets were even bigger than you normally would have at Christmas. But very quickly, the transactions fell down sharply. And, I think through that first lockdown, we were very strict on customer numbers and social distancing, etc. And as a result of that, we probably saw quite a low number of customers. But when they came in, they did spend very heavily. And then after that, we came into the summertime, it kind of calmed down. And then we went into the next lockdown, we saw a similar pattern, but not quite to the same extent. So we did see a drop off in transactions, but the basket rise wasn't nearly as big as it was then. And then we went into Christmas, but Christmas was kind of amplified by the fact that immediately after Christmas, we were going into lockdown number 3. And you can see lockdown number 3, the same pattern happened, slightly bigger impact than lockdown 2. But it basically modeled the same pattern. And then what we've seen since we came out of that lockdown, we've seen a pretty steady situation. And I think what we're seeing is that while the transaction numbers, as soon as the stores became open again, went back to normal, the basket has kind of probably rested somewhat higher than it was going into. So if you look at the 2019 numbers, which is right at the left, you see the basket has increased since then. So I think people are still holding on to some of the habits they had through the lockdowns. And in terms of what we saw by category, on each of these areas would describe one of the categories that we have. So in terms of on the left, we saw obviously the orange line is the pre lockdown, and you see the panic buying. And on the right, you can see a lot of the biggest line was obviously in the non-food, toilet rolls, etc. So we saw a massive lift there, but we saw lifts everywhere, and particularly big lifts on the ambient and frozen areas where there was no date issues. And then after that, what we saw quite high uplifts in kind of cooking areas, like for instance, protein, fresh areas, because basically people were cooking at home. We didn't see the same lift in bread and cakes. And then frozen was another area where we saw massive lifts in the lockdowns, but we've struggled to keep up with those as we come out of the lockdowns now. And then liquor, obviously people drank a lot. So liquor was quite a big area through the lockdown. But as we came out of lockdown, we had 2 changes in legislation, and we've struggled to keep up with the numbers that we had through lockdowns, although we're still probably trading higher than we were in 2019. So what did that mean overall? What it meant overall was that if you look at the overall market share, Dunnes Stores being the green line, we can see that we had lockdown 1 had a dramatic impact on our market share relative to retailers that had online offerings and more stores. Lockdown 2 wasn't quite as pronounced, but lockdown 3 was more pronounced, but not as bad as lockdown 1. And as the stores have opened, we've seen customers coming back relatively in line with the normal patterns that we would see, and we would see that we've lifted up as a result of that. So what were the key things that we took out from the COVID period? And I think what we saw is obviously we saw the initial stockpiling, and we know that people ate and drank too much, and we all probably came out of COVID with probably a few extra pounds than we wanted. I think what we did see was that the supermarket was probably the only place that people could go, so therefore became very much the experience of the week. And there's probably less shopping around at that point. People went to their designated supermarket and pretty much stuck with that all the way through. And then, but for us, what that meant is they did a full shop with us, whereas they may shop around normally. And therefore they were able to try quite a lot of the product that would maybe not have tried before. Now that in itself causes some issues in terms of the demand going up on those lines. And I'll come on to that in a second. I think what we did see, though, is people did want to come back to stores. Although they did shop online, I do think they wanted to come back to stores. And as soon as they had the chance, when the lockdowns were finished, we saw a very sharp rise in transactions in stores. Definitely, we benefited from the the fact that food service was closed for so long, and I think some of that business is staying with us. And I think people have maybe got used to a bit more home cooking, a bit more entertaining at home, and that's something that we think may well stick with us as we come out of COVID. And we see that in the fact that our basket levels have settled slightly higher than they were in 2019. I think the other thing it did identify very clearly for us was that we were lacking a home delivery service, and we could have done with a few more stores, which are not easy to switch on. So that's where we were. In terms of what that meant to us with regard to our supply chain, you can see that we had some real big problems, especially during the lockdowns. When the demand spiked as much as it did, our service level dropped by as much as 10% in the first lockdown, and probably around 6% in the second. And even when we came into the Omicron phase, the level of absenteeism caused us quite a lot of issues in terms of the supply chain and production from some suppliers. So it did really cause us quite a lot of issues, and those issues do persist now for different reasons, but they still persist. And overall, we saw quite a drop in our overall service level. The red line being fresh and the blue line being ambient. So fresh has still remained slightly higher, but it has the pattern is very similar for both in terms of where we are. So what do we see? We saw huge demand spikes in the first area of lockdown. Because of social distancing in our own depot, we actually had to take down our ranges quite a bit. So in some categories, we took as much as 40% of the range out to allow the level of picking in the depot, and also to concentrate our production in the key sellers. We had some issues, not persistent, but we did have some issues coming in from abroad, particularly things like pasta and such like from Italy. That was very much in demand in the first lockdown, and it took us a little while to get ourselves right for that. Our protein factories were periodically hit, different species at different times, and that did cause us some issues. That was mainly due to forced absence from COVID and the level of testing that was there. And then the big issue in terms of absenteeism probably was the biggest was around when the Omicron came around November time, and that affected both stores and factories. And as a result of that, we had issues in stores, and also we had issues in the supply chain. And that's something that probably was probably worse than we would have expected at that stage. And then overall, I think if you average our inbound service level, we probably dropped as low as 6% on average, below our normal inbound of around 98%. So that was the impact. In terms of Brexit itself, yeah, I mean, it did cause us some issues. It probably was kind of masked by the fact that we had all the activity going on COVID. I think what we did see was that we had a lot of paperwork to set up for suppliers, a lot of accounts to set up because of documentation. We had to extend our order lead times, day 1 for day 4 for most people, even as much as day 1 for day 7 for some suppliers on the ambient side. And that was something that we had to do to make sure that we could get the stock in at the right times. The real issue probably is still around veterinary checks. That's probably the area that's causing the delays the most for us. And that's probably the only thing that's probably still there to some extent. And what we're seeing is that there's a variety of supply chain solutions. Some people came via the north. Some people went EU to EU. Others had different segments in their warehouse. But I think overall, what we've seen is probably between ourselves and suppliers, there's probably more stock being held on the island than there was pre-Brexit. So just to cover us for any of those delays, and probably that's something that is still the case. I think what we also saw through probably the second half of 2020 into 2021 was there were quite a lot of foreign nationals who went home, and I think that gave us quite a big skill loss amongst some of our supply base, and as a result of that, we did see some issues coming through, but also there were issues in terms of transportation and drivers. And then when we got through the Omicron, there was also an impact on production. So I think that was something that was a big impact and has led to some wage inflation. We certainly have seen it amongst our staff in stores, and I think that pressure is coming through in many areas, and it was probably exacerbated through the Omicron stage. What didn't happen through the kind of pandemic was probably a lot of business development, if you want to call it that. So, a lot of the time buyers were spent looking at their supply chain and trying to get stock. There was very few factory visits. There was very little MPD and innovation through that period of time. And there probably wasn't very much kind of switching between suppliers. I think it's a case of stick with what you know and kind of get as much stock as you can. I think as we come out of COVID, this presents a massive opportunity because there feels like there's a big backlog in development and innovation. And that's something we feel that will come through in the next couple of years. Obviously, in light of any supply chain issues, but I think overall, I think there is a backlog in this areas, and this is something we will be looking at. So, one of the things that we're focusing on as we come out of COVID, I think the first thing we're focusing on is that we believe that the rise of home cooking and preparing food with a kind of increased workforce working from home, even not at the levels we had through lockdown, but clearly there will be a residual number of people still working from home. We think this is something that will grow, and it potentially will there be a lot more of this going on. I think people didn't find it as bad as they thought they would. All right, there is a challenge to get variety into what we're cooking. So I think there will be an increase. So cooking, ingredients for cooking, meal solutions, these are all areas I think that will become much more important to us anyway. And I think it's something that would appeal to maybe younger shoppers who we probably struggle to get at the same levels as we get others. So I think this is something that will develop, and it will go for everything from raw ingredients to prepared meals to ready meals to even cooked solutions that we would have on our Baxter and Green side of things. So I think that's something that's going to be a big focus for us. I think the second thing is, I think there's going to be potentially a big increase in entertaining at home. I think people had to do it through COVID. I think they didn't find it as bad as they did. I think with the inflationary pressures that we're all feeling at the moment, that potentially what we're seeing is that customers may have to maybe cut back on maybe one of those meals they may have out. And we see an opportunity here for people entertaining at home. And on that basis, I think what we would see is that we would see some of our more kind of special occasion food like Simply Better. I mean, Simply Better has doubled in the time of the pandemic. So if you look at 2019 versus 2022, it's more than doubled. So I think what we're seeing is people maybe, if they're going to have a special occasion in the house, maybe treating themselves to some of the things that we would have. So I think not only would Simply Better benefit, but some of our other kind of Irish food franchises would also pick up as a result of that. So I think that's one trend we think will stay, and we will look to push that quite hard and still be bringing in a lot of those Irish food offerings into our stores. Online grocery, we started from a standing start in the middle of 2020. We managed to get a site together and by the time we got to October, we had introduced the Buy Me from a number of stores, which is the orange line on that graph there. And then by the time we got to May of last year, we began to start delivering groceries from our shops, 2 shops in Dublin. And by the time we got to Christmas, we had 9 shops that were offering online grocery. And to be fair, it has gone quite well. It would probably indicate to us that there was a latent demand for Duns in this marketplace, and therefore we got quite a good lift without any advertising, not even any branding on the vans. Really, there's only a handful of the vans that are branded like the one you see in the picture, but it has been a substantial steep. And what we've found is that the blue line being the online delivery from Dunnes stores, as that's gone up, we haven't lost the Buy Me business that we had. So in itself, it says that potentially there are two separate journeys that are, quite independent of each other, and therefore there's many channels for people to come and buy online. What we found is that we have got a few new shoppers as a result of that, and they have been quite sticky. And now the online represents our 5th biggest store. So you can see if we're able to add more capacity in 2022, maybe introduce click and collect, I think there's quite a lot of potential in the online space. The other thing that we launched is the Dunnes Stores app, and that has proven to be quite a useful tool for us to communicate with our shoppers. As we stand now, there's an audience of around 700,000, of which 50% of them are active every week. We see that people who use the app are spending slightly more in store, and we see the app as a good way to tell people what's going on in Dunnes Stores, both on the food side and on the textile side. And it provides a good way to kind of let people know of their offers. And also with the voucher, a lot of people are using the app to store their vouchers in their digital wallet. Even as we speak, only half of our shoppers are actually have migrated across. So there's still a few more to come. But what we're seeing is the shoppers come to the site. It also leads them on to either the textiles website or the grocery website. So that's something that we will develop further in the year ahead, and we think that will be something that will be has quite a lot of potential. But I think the most important thing for suppliers who may be listening to this and to others is that the new kind of digital world that we live in, like we are today on the webinar, but it provides 2 customer communication channels for our customers to see what's in Dunnes Stores. And that's something that we would develop, and it provides an opportunity to let people know what's coming. What else did we find out by going online? We found out that we had crap availability in our stores, and that was something that we need to fix. So what we found is that in the early part of the week, we're having quite a lot of availability issues. And that's something that we will put some focus on, not only in the online shops, but it also will be in all the stores. And what we found is that we are probably running out of some of our direct store product in the early part of the week. So we need to look at how we order that and see if we can get some more of that in. We are centralizing some of that into depot, and we'll continue to do more of that. And we also are introducing more automatic ordering, so that the demand that comes through the tills generates the order for that. So that will help us in terms of trying to pick up our availability. And from the numbers we've seen, there's quite a big opportunity there, particularly at the early part of the week. And I think with people working from home, the pattern of shopping has changed a little bit, and it's a little bit more spread out. It's not as congregated on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So getting ourselves in better shape in the early part of the week will be something we'll be focused on. And that will also include, looking at additional distribution facilities. In terms of what areas we're looking at in terms of product. There's a big focus on local Irish product. We're also looking at things we can do from a sustainability point of view. So sourcing local is a very big part of that. Supporting some of our smaller suppliers, that will be something we're looking at. And obviously looking at unnecessary packaging, that's something we will look at. And then from a macro level, things we can do to save energy, reduce our carbon footprint, that will be doing on a store level, but from a product level, very much focused on Irish and and also kind of from certain areas and developing products that are unique. So that's something that we will be very focused on. We've a store development program which will include some of our bigger stores in city centres, and really we want to try and make the stores the hub. I think it became a safe place to go during lockdown, and we want to make it an interesting, exciting place to go. And I think the piece that we're adding into our stores now, in addition to the food, textiles, and home, is beauty and fragrance. So that's something that we're looking at, and potentially, Henry Street will be one of the stores that we look at, which sits next to Debenhams at Exeter Supermarket. I think, unfortunately, the other thing that we will have to be very mindful of is the fact that shoppers will, for a variety of reasons, feel the economic pressures again. And I think, finding ways to offer better value through quality fresh foods, our own label, great value on brands, and then also, the 10 off 50 and the 5 to 25 as mechanics to lower the basket. We need to find ways to offer value to our customers, because similar to what happened in 2008, if things get tight, we do need to make sure we can continue to offer good value. So as a kind of overall, I think they're kind of the main areas that we'll be focusing on as we come out of COVID. So I hope that gives you a bit of an idea of what happened through COVID and what we were doing as we come out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Really good insights there as to what was happening at the retail side. And I think certainly the Irish food producers will be delighted to hear that there's a latent demand for innovation from the retailers, because there's certainly a big backlog of innovation at the producer side that we all look forward to presenting and hopefully seeing that get to market in the short term if possible. Just to mention that we will be taking questions. We have a short window for questions at the very end for any of our speakers. So if anybody would like to submit questions to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, we'll hope to get to a couple of those towards the end. But I think we'll bring in Professor Joe Bogue and Dr. Lana Repper of Cork University Business School. I think clearly data and information is crucial to us in these times of change. Food consumption is not a constant. It evolves, driven by technology and lifestyle. I think we're going to hear some insights from that whole area from Professor Joe and Dr. Lana. You're very welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Alison, and delighted to be here today from a very wet and windy Cork City. Myself and my colleague Lana Repper will talk to you about changing food consumer and future product trends, for example. This is kind of information we've gathered, I guess, from our research and looking at trends worldwide. I also think post-COVID it's a good idea to look at ideas. What are the new ideas out there, for example? And we're going to focus, I guess, on new ideas happening in markets, for example, product trends, and we go through some supply chain issues. So in terms of consumer change, I mean, again, this speaks to a lot of what Tara said, which is great. Things like the focus on local coming out of COVID, consumers are rethinking about local ingredients, local foods, for example, again, value for money. The shift in consumers are also looking for health and wellness. So can we build that into our brands, for example? I notice a huge interest in gut health, for example. We do a lot of work in this university on the gut-brain axis and probiotics, for example, and it's a big area, and more personalized nutrition. So this is something we're seeing across a lot of markets. Also the shopping experience, the virtual shopping experience, and we'll speak about that later on, and things like the impact of social media. How have you built social media into your brand, into your product, for example, and are we having those discussions with our consumers? In terms of how will this impact then on the products we're looking for, what consumers are seeking, quality over quantity. And again, this speaks to what Tara was saying about local value for money, for example, but quality. And again, this is for obviously specific segments of consumers. We will also have consumers looking for obviously, lower costs, for example, but quality is a key factor. The area of functional foods, bringing health ingredients into different foods, for example, for SMEs, for mid-sized companies, for example, and again, that impact on gut health. Convenient snacks, healthy convenient snacks. If we link that, for example, with the gluten-free area, has a big growing area for the last number of years, but the sensory profile. So how do we build a better tasting product, for example? I remember reading a report recently that said something like that one of the key trends was taste. I mean, I presume taste was always important to products, for example, but can we get a better sensory profile? Can we look to what consumers want in our specific target market? Things like brand stories, how we stories linked, for example, to ethics, sustainability, as Tara said, is huge at the moment and will become more and more a base requirement for products. And things like experiential marketing, or we experience the brand, for example. What are the key issues in terms of how we engage with our brands? So we would see product trends maybe in 8 different areas, for example, and you can see with things like science-led innovation, how are our brands engaging with science, the new flavors and textures, for example, new segments. I'll introduce you to 2 segments that I think may be interesting segments over the next couple of years, for example. Next level of convenience, how we build convenience into our products. So these, I guess, are the areas we will see, and Lana myself will address some of these particular areas. In terms of segments, I think choice issues are really important. So on the left-hand side, maybe we might think about the technical aspects. If we're developing new products post-COVID, what's the sensory profile? Do we know about taste, texture requirement of our consumers, for example? The format of the product, does that work for consumers? Packaging type, vitamin requirements for particular health engaging foods, for example. And the right-hand side, maybe more the branding side, like things like engagement with the brand, with the consumer, how are we engaging with new technologies, for example? Do we need to now look at new technologies that we might engage in the next 5 years after COVID, obviously, where we're now beginning to look for new ideas and really think about what's going to happen in the future and how we describe the product and the label claims, for example. One of the segments I think is quite interesting is the elderly market. It's a very homogenous market from maybe young, old to old consumers. We haven't really targeted the elderly with specific brands, for example. A lot of brands are worried about aging their brands if they target specific elderly consumers. It's a very complex market. We're doing a lot of work ourselves understanding food choice of more the elderly market, for example, and how we adapt products for this particular market. So maybe changing the sensory profile, the taste, texture of our products for this particular group. I think this is a huge opportunity for companies because again, we have holidays for elderly consumers, we have banking for elderly consumers, but yet in the food area, we tend to lump all consumers together, where I think it's a huge opportunity to target this particular segment of consumers. And, the research that we're doing, elderly or aging consumers are saying they want products targeted at them, with specific vitamin profiles. And I think this is a good opportunity for companies maybe to develop very specific marketing strategies. Generation Z, this is the group that has grown up, for example, with technology, information. They engage differently, they connect differently through apps, through video links, for example. Are we looking at this particular segment? Are we engaging with this segment? And I think as we put our head above the parapet after COVID, there's opportunities here, for example, and in terms of how we might engage with these particular consumers. We also have a lot of blurred segments. I read this morning that they were talking about the meat substitute market is slowing down hugely, but we've a lot of segments here in terms of flexitarians, plant-based, whole food plant-based. There's a lot of opportunities in maybe engaging some of these different segments. New categories. Okay, again, we can see here just 3 examples that we said we'd introduce you to. One is the first ever nitrogen-infused cola. Again, we're taking a very base product, and what we're doing is we're infusing with a smooth and creamy sensory profile. The importance of the sensory profile to these foods and brands is so important, and we're giving consumers a slightly different experience. Then we have Bud Light, which is zero carbs in development for 10 years we hear. But again, it's how we're taking some of these products, because we're seeing a lot of companies, for example, upcycling grain and developing new drinks from it. So there's a lot of opportunities there, and a functional chocolate targeted at healthy aspects. Two new categories here. These are meal replacement products. One is Huel and the other is Y Food, for example, two meal replacement products. The reason I mention these is it's a growing market, but sensory is a key factor. One is dairy-based, one is plant-based. So again, getting the sensory profile of your product suitable for your correct target market. Again, mentioning sensory, these are flavor charts from Kerry. I just thought were quite interesting, how we might target specific new products, build different flavors into our products through looking at emerging flavors, for example, textures for elderly consumers, and how these might impact in new product development over the next couple of years. What flavors will we see in the next 2 years, and are you ahead of that in terms of developing your products?
Another interesting aspect is packaging. So as you can see in the middle of the screen, the zero waste packaging, or packaging that you can refill, is going to be more and more important. Also, we see some of the creativity on the packaging side, where you could actually use the packaging for dual purposes. For example, you can plant flowers and so on. But the packaging and this notion of sustainability is important, and it's going to become more and more important. In terms of the new levels of convenience, obviously consumers coming out of COVID, coming out of lots of different challenging times, they want convenience, but they have different requirements. During COVID, people got used to good taste and nutrition. So they want to bring that convenience together with good taste, nutrition, and they want to be able to achieve their wellness goals as well. So we see a lot of different products, they're targeting this type of convenience, and this is only going to be more advanced, and the brands and companies are going to offer better options. For example, frozen meals, but not just regular, but also vegan options. We also see Deliveroo and Uber Eats, and also monthly or weekly subscription, which are getting more and more offerings to their consumers. We also see on the other side some of the companies using one app where the consumers can actually buy their products in the supermarket without using cash. They can download QR codes at the same time. They can order click and collect, and they get rewarded. So that type of convenience, the one that we call the next level convenience, is going to become more and more important. It was already mentioned the importance of brand story, and brand presence. So the new base requirements are going to require from the company to bring that immersive experience, something that you can, as a consumer, just not just see, but also touch and feel. An example is this new immersive Guinness bar experience. When they describe this bar, they talk all about how consumers are going to experience a brand in a different way. Also developing different options, as I mentioned previously, for vegans as well. Developing new products like Y Food, but combining it with traditional recipes such as lassi drink. That's also going to become really, really important in future. Now, when it comes to science, obviously, science is leading in many different ways. Particularly what we're seeing in the last few years is targeting those key challenges that our society is facing, such as anxiety and stress and insomnia. So we are going to see more and more functional ingredients targeting those issues. There's going to be segmentation based on different types of benefits, for example, brain benefits, and also drinks which are going to be tailored according to required different sport performances. And we also see that in the future, sustainable farming and using different foods that maybe we didn't consider before is going to become more and more important because of its sustainability value, but also because consumers are looking for sustainable solutions. When it comes to technology, consumers, at least a certain percentage of consumers want something new. They want revolution in the food sector as well when it comes to technology. So it's now becoming more popular to use 3D printing, for example, for your food. And in the future, we see that this is going to become more and more popular, especially among younger consumers, Generation Z, where you can actually 3D print your own food. Personalization, such as having your own label or personalizing your food order as well, is going to become more important. Now, the other segment that is really interesting is the artificial intelligence, but in the service sector. We expect that the experience for the consumers is going to become effective, cost saving, and really user friendly. We see, for example, cashless supermarkets are becoming a thing. Also, drone delivery, where you're going to be ordering your food and it's going to be delivered by drone, or you might be served in the restaurant by a robot, which is going to be very interesting and different experience. And this kind of like extreme of technology, which I'm sure you heard about, metaverse. Well, that's becoming a thing, definitely. It's this type of augmented reality that is going to become very important part of the business world, and therefore retailing world. And also it's going to be interesting to see how retailing world and producers are going to adapt to this metaverse, and who is going to be the first one leading this acceptance. We assume it's going to be Gen Z, but also Joe was mentioning the elderly population. They're very different. They're using technology these days, so we wouldn't be surprised that this metaverse is going to become popular among many different categories.
So in terms of Generation Z, this just gives you an example of some of the innovations occurring within our students in the business school. Just to give you a snapshot, things like recycling or upcycling of juices, for example, from fruits and vegetables. So again, sustainability is on the mind of Generation Z. Pairing foods, so pairing things like flavored chickpeas with beers and wines, for example, big area in terms of, how we link cocktail kits, where, we see meal kits where consumers can engage with certain parts of the product and feel that they've done a bit of work. For example, nitro brew coffee, different types of healthy desserts for kids, for example, there's great ideas around it. And all these products the students have developed in terms of the branding, probiotic bars, for example, again, going back to the microbiome, that link with gut health, and again, vegetarian jackfruit as a vegetarian food. So just to give an example of the types of products that our students are engaged in, linking back to Gen Z.
So obviously future food is going to have certain benefits, but also certain challenges. As mentioned, there's a lot of opportunity for producers to tap into some of the aspects that we provided in such a short period of time, such as health and wellness, also technology. Technology is going to allow us to have better, more efficient communication, and there's going to be an opportunity to develop product with new functional ingredients. On the challenging side, it is expected that more and more products are going to be required from the consumer side to be sourced and packed sustainably. There is going to be this opportunity cost, whether we should innovate and whether that innovation makes sense. If something doesn't taste better or it doesn't have any functional ingredients, should we innovate in that way? Also consumer acceptance for different type of sources such as insect food, and increase emphasis on virtual. So it's going to be great to see in the future, hopefully different types of supports that are going to be available for consumers and for producers to kind of like get along with this virtual reality. And the purchase, what we expect is going to be more virtual, more quicker, and it's going to cater for different diets and different acceptance of technologies. You can see on this image in the middle of the screen, from the traditional way of purchasing to very, very much virtual way.
So to sum up, we've taken on a very whirlwind tour of kind of new changes, new trends. For example, sustainability, right-hand side, is going to be ever so important, as mentioned by Tara, for example, and we see this about traceability. Upcycling, for example, the customer experience, how are you engaging with your customers? Are you having a one-to-one conversation with your customers, particularly sensory side, which we think is going to be more and more important. Technology, developing apps, for example, we're looking at developing apps for elderly consumers where they can engage in terms of recipes, product ingredients, that sort of thing. New ingredients. Ireland hopefully is going to become a world leader in functional marine ingredients, and how we might incorporate some of these ingredients into our different products. And identification new segments, as I said to you, the elderly segment, great opportunities, and Gen Z, and how we engage and immerse ourselves in these consumers to have those conversations. So thank you for your time. I hope that gives you food for thought.
Thank you very much, Joe and Lana. Fascinating to get that insight, I suppose, from the academic side. And again, I think many of the food industry have seen very excellent collaborations with the academic world in terms of both innovation and technology, and so many of the areas that are now crisscrossing our food world. So moving along, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, David Berry, who's the Managing Director of Kantar Ireland. And we've very much heard the experience of one retailer just from James in terms of what's happening in the market. I think David's going to give us a broader view of what's happening in terms of food consumption trends and household purchasing. So look forward to hearing from you, David. Over to you.
Thanks, Alison. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here talking to you this morning about the post-pandemic Irish grocery market. So following the last 2 years, it's great to be able to talk about a post-pandemic time frame. So, and the way I wanted to do that was in 3 different areas. So I wanted to assess the outlook and what it looks like for brands, retailers, and then onto consumers. So they're the 3 areas that I'm going to be talking you through this morning over the next 10 minutes or so. And before moving into the outlook, I wanted just to pick out 5 of the big headlines that we saw from the data that we collect from 5,000 shoppers across Ireland, across every week of the year. So these are the big 5 themes. So number 1 would be that we continue to see a really, really strong demand for in-home consumption. I think James mentioned it there very clearly that the basket size has settled at a higher level than it would have been pre-pandemic, and we see that. So we see an additional 1.2 billion euros spent on take-home food and drink in 2021 compared to 2019. So it isn't just about that big post-pandemic, the big pandemic peak in 2020. It is more sustained than that. So we think that demand is going to remain strong. The second one, and probably the most important one for the audience this morning, is that the success of Irish brands continues. So when we look at the most popular 100 brands that are purchased across Ireland, we see that the share Irish brands capture amongst those top 100 brands has increased. So it's reached a high point of 48%. So that's the highest level that we've seen. It's continuously edged up across recent years. So we see brands performing well, we see food and drink as a whole performing well, but then when we delve down specifically into Irish brands, we see them performing even better than that. So really strong story there. We are starting to see that inflation is becoming a bigger challenge for consumers. So definitely the importance of value for money is going to be important across the remainder of 2022. So we see food price inflation reaching 2.4%. It's increased now for 7 consecutive months. So we think that increase is going to continue. There's an awful lot of pressure coming through, both in terms of supply chain, but also in terms of the cost of raw materials as well. So that is going to remain a challenge for consumers. Number 4, we'll talk about retailers a little bit more generally, but we see the shift back to being a more balanced approach for retailers between new delivery methods and opening up online and trying to connect with consumers in different ways. That was definitely a big trend over 2020 and the first part of 2021, but we are seeing a shift back to a more balanced approach between those new delivery methods and traditional physical stores and bricks and mortars, and I'll touch on that briefly a little bit later on. And number 5 would be, if we think about the success Irish brands have continued to continue that success, the importance of connecting and finding new shoppers and new consumers is really, really vital. So when we look at those brands that are in growth, we see that 9 out of 10 of those brands have actually been able to attract new consumers to help fuel that growth. So finding and identifying ways that you can stimulate new consumption occasions and recruit new consumers is really, really important. Okay, so we'll start off just with some of the top line numbers about brand performance. So here we're looking at a long-term view of brand performance. We're comparing what we've seen in 2021 with the landscape back in 2017, and we've seen 24% sales growth for branded food. So really, really strong performance. And even if we strip out the impact of the pandemic, we would still see double-digit growth for brands across that time frame. And the reason being that is that brands have increased share. So they've performed well. They've performed ahead of their non-branded competition. As a whole, they've actually increased their share of consumer spend by 1.7 percentage points. And when we look at it on a category basis, we see that in 55% of categories that we track and that we monitor ongoing, then 55% of those show brands have actually managed to maintain share or seen an increase over that time frame. So really, really strong performance of brands as a whole. And then if we delve a little bit deeper into that and just strip out the Irish produced brands, then the success story is there to see. And it's a really, really strong story, and probably one of the key takeaways from my presentation this morning. So what we're looking at here is 5 years of share data for Irish brands amongst our most popular 100 purchased brands. And these brands account for a significant amount of sales. And what we've seen is that back in 2018, Irish produced brands captured 47% of consumer spend, and that's gradually increased and hit that high point of just over 48% in 2021. So it's a really strong success story. It shows that there's a real demand there amongst consumers. So the importance of supporting local and buying locally produced goods is really, really clear for Irish consumers. So the more that brands can tap into that and make sure that's clear in the messaging, then the more potential success there is. So actually, when we look at the top 100 brands that are purchased, then 43 of those 100 are Irish produced. If we combine sales for those 43, it's 1.1 billion euro. And even in the latest year, it's continued to grow. So it isn't just about 1 year of growth. This is about consistent growth. And we see that in the numbers there. So brands as a whole have grown by 24%. When we look at the Irish produced brands, that's the numbers 29%. So really, really strong performance ahead of non-Irish produced brands. Okay, and then the important question is about, right, how do we sustain that growth? We've seen really strong success for Irish brands. What is in our arsenal to try and continue that? And we identify 5 levers that brands can use to try and capture new consumers, stimulate incremental consumption occasions, and help drive their future growth. And a lot of these will actually link back to the examples that we saw from Joe and Lana earlier. So if I start on the left-hand side here, we're talking about more targets, and this is about making sure that your brands appeal to as many consumers as possible. Joe mentioned the over 60 consumer. That could be a good avenue to explore, and also it could be about making sure that you can appeal to. You've a vegan friendly offering that means, again, you're appealing to different dietary needs. The second one here is about new needs, and this is very much about identifying a brand new need that you can tap into. So very incremental consumption opportunities that would be associated with this. And a good example, I think, recently is about maybe low and no alcohol beverages. So if we think about alcohol-free cocktails, that's definitely a new need that's been identified and one that brands can tap into. Then on to the third one. It's about more moments. And example here could be if your brand is generally consumed at a key mealtime occasion, is there a snacking opportunity that you could extend your brand into with some innovation or some change to packaging formats, for example, that will just expand out the moments that you can be consumed at. Number 4 is about more presence, and this is about physical availability. So it's about making sure that you're present in as many different purchase occasions that the consumer might be making. So it could be about trying to capture a new listing opportunity, or it could be about entering a new channel, making sure that your brand's available online. So different ways that you could expand your presence. And then the final one is about more categories. So is it possible to extend your brand into adjacent categories? Or is it possible to look at developing innovation that, again, will expand out and make sure that you're situated in different aisles across the store, so that, again, you're more available to consumers? So food for thought in terms of the levers that could be used to try and capture more consumption occasions and shoppers. So we'll move on and talk briefly about retailers. And I think we've spotted an interesting dynamic, and this is actually a slide taken from last year, and it showed that where the focus was for retailers, for the big retailers in Ireland, in that immediate response to COVID. So very much about looking for new ways to engage with consumers, new ways to reach shoppers, whether it is about click and collect or drive through, drone delivery, working in partnership with other suppliers, or it could be about an app to make sure that you've got a connection with consumers. So fantastic innovative response from the retailers to that pressure that was coming through from COVID. But if we then move forward and actually look at some of the more recent stories or more recent tactics that have been at play by retailers and being covered in the news, then it's an interesting change here, an interesting dynamic. So more focus on physical stores, more focus on expanding floor space, whether it is about Donnybrook Fair expanding into Dundrum with an innovative new store format. Could be about acquisitions with Tesco looking to acquire Joyce's supermarkets. We've got the example there, James mentioned about that need for new stores, with Dunnes looking to roll out smaller shops in different locations, suburban locations. And then the continued store rollout for Aldi and Lidl. So it does seem as if it's more about a balanced approach for the retailers between, yes, continuing to develop online and continuing to look at different delivery methods there, but also making sure that they've got the right physical store footprint as well. Okay, and the final section was just looking at consumers and trying to get under the skin of consumers a little bit and see how they're feeling and what their pressure points might be. And no surprise to see that one of the big shout outs here is the cost of living. But there's three. This is taken from an omnibus survey that we conducted at the end of January. We asked 1,000 consumers about a range of different questions, one of them being about how are your personal circumstances versus last year. So that's the top left here. And we can see we were a little bit bruised by COVID. So we had more people feeling worse off than better off. So there was a net negativity there coming through when we're thinking back to how we were last year. But then in the bottom left-hand corner, if we ask them about, okay, how do we expect their personal circumstances to compare this time next year, there was more positivity coming through. So more people, and almost did have flipped around here with more people saying that they'll be better off than worse off. And then on the right-hand side, we asked people about, okay, what are the most important issues that need to be addressed? And it's no surprise here that cost of living and price increases and price of housing really comes out as being important for consumers. So they are feeling the pinch. Definitely the importance of value for money is really the takeout from this, which isn't just about price. It isn't about making sure that products are cheap. It's actually about communicating the value, making sure that the value message comes through to consumers. Okay, so I was just going to leave you with what I thought as being the key takeouts for Irish brands. So 5 key takeouts that we saw from the presentation. So the first is that Irish production definitely engages consumers. So really making sure that that message is maximised is key. New consumers are vital for brand growth. We've seen that. So 9 out of 10 growing brands found new shoppers to help fuel that growth. And the cost of living is the #1 concern for consumers at the moment. So that importance of value for money is there. The local supply chain is vital. We've seen that international sourcing is getting more and more complex. So if there's that local supply chain, then it gives an advantage for locally produced brands. And then the final one is about trying to link in your brand plans to some of the growth levers with some really, really strong examples that we saw earlier from Joe and Lana. So thank you very much. Thanks for your attention this morning.
Thank you very much, David. Some great insights there in terms of giving us a full view of the market and how consumers are thinking and behaving, I think, in this time of great change. So thank you very much for that. I think we might go back to Tara. Tara, just thank you for rejoining us back. We will get the feedback from our next speaker in the next few minutes. Tara, maybe just to bring us up to date, I know many of us are experiencing all of those changes we've discussed earlier in terms of supply chain issues, the current news as a food producer ourselves to look and see what's happening, some real further challenges coming down the line. What are you hearing from food producers in terms of ability to I suppose, weather that further storm that we're having at the moment in terms of particularly what's happening in the Ukraine situation? Have you seen any feedback coming through yet?
Yes, Alison, I guess we've been engaging very, very closely with all of the industry sectors at this point, and there's huge concern. And I guess so much of this in many ways is fear of the unknown, because it's so all-encompassing, the spaces that this could touch in our businesses. I mentioned inflation, and energy is one of the key areas, and the costs seem to be going up by the hour, notwithstanding even concerns and availability as well. And I think people, without a doubt, at a B2B level, are probably doing some level of panic buying, which is obviously interfering then with regular supply chains, which is obviously almost a self-fulfilling prophecy then when product isn't there, because people are panic buying at the same time. So that energy piece and the costs of energy is concerning, particularly for people who've probably locked into tender prices to deliver a product of that as well. There's also concerns around the continent with regard to other supplying countries. So be that on inputs that you may have, And that's right the way through the supply chain, whether it's fertilizer, whether it's glass bottles, whether it's frozen product coming into you. All of these elements have now a degree of uncertainty coming through as well. I know even our fishing industry is concerned as to the availability and the cost of diesel for them to go and search for product as well. So there's multiple concerns, and I guess you're now looking at the consumer acceptance of price increases, because consumers are going to be hit on multiple levels. Consumers are trying to navigate this inflationary environment themselves, and at the same time, consumers want to support their local suppliers, and I do believe they will need to lean in even heavier to support those suppliers to help them to navigate this uncertainty as well.
Okay. So I think challenges for us all. I know we're running a little bit over time, but we've had a number of questions in, and if we all have time to hold on, I'd like to pose a couple of those to the panel if we could. James, a couple of questions in from you. I know we have a lot of suppliers in the audience viewing today's event. So one pretty fundamental question, I suppose, coming from one of our attendees. What makes a good supplier relationship from a Dunnes Stores perspective? And I know that's a very broad question, but if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, look, I think there's probably four things that probably will come to mind when I think about that. I mean, clearly, a good product, good brand, that's key. That fulfills a consumer need. I think that's undeniable. I think the brand itself needs to be well supported, have a good following, be reasonably innovative, but also I think on top of that, the service level has been something that's been a focus. So kind of good product, well supported, innovative, and good service level. And I think between those four, that they're kind of criteria I would say would be the key ones for us.
And you mentioned in your presentation this lag, I suppose, of the need and the desire for innovation, and certainly suppliers have seen that across the last couple of years. Any particular categories where you think the biggest opportunity lies for new, different, interesting products?
Yeah, well, look, I think if we're going to see more cooking at home, I think solutions for that, both complete solutions and ingredients, would be a key area. I think health and diet, and kind of be it kind of diet choices or things that will help people with certain diet requirements. I think that's going to continue to grow. I think the focus on health is there, and for us, but that's probably because we're coming from a lower base. Probably beauty and fragrance is something we will see as a growth area. But in there we are looking at some Irish suppliers as well. So it's not just on the food side. We'd also see some opportunity on the non-food side as well.
As we move forward into yet another period of challenge, and we've all talked about, and daily I think we're all talking about value for money and the potential price pressures on the entire supply chain. As we move through that, what would you like to see more of from your Irish supply base in terms of working together on that challenge, other than lower prices, which clearly is a fundamental, but I suppose we're all struggling with this, but how do you think we can work together? Is it about providing better quality in that value quality?
Yeah, I think so, Alison. I think that better value, if you define it as the quality divided by the price. So if you can deliver a quality product, and then even if the price is not the lowest price, it still offers great value. And I think people are probably watching things like waste at home and such like. So if you've got products that fit the portion size, have the quality, and don't go off at home, I think that is value as well, because I think it's not just kind of the shelf price, because that in itself will be a race to the bottom. So I think you need to kind of get the balance between quality and price. And I think if we can do that, that's kind of where we would be, much more in the kind of better value as opposed to the lowest price.
Okay, James, that's a positive note, I think, to end on. I'd like to thank everybody for participating in the event today, to Joe, Lana, David, James, and Tara, who's had to rush off to another meeting. And thank you to all of our participants, but we're also to our attendees. We've had a fantastic group of people watching in from across the industry, both on the retailer, but most particularly on the producer side. So thank you to everybody. Just to let you know that the event is being recorded, and the event and presentations will be emailed to you and available in the coming days. And I think there's certainly a lot in there that can help us all as we work together to support Irish food producers in the challenging times that we face. So thank you to Love Irish Food for hosting the event, and all our participants, and to you for listening. Take care. Goodbye.